Well, we're now reaching out to Corey Hogan, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy, just one of two Liberal MPs from Alberta. Corey Hogan, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So your government just announced a second tranche of national projects last week, and still missing from that list is discussion of an Alberta pipeline. When are we going to hear about one? Is it too over-optimistic to expect an announcement right now?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's missing because the government of Alberta, when they decided they wanted to be a proponent for a pipeline project, themselves said they're not going to be in a position to bring something to the major projects office until next spring. So I'm sure they're working through it. They're doing their due diligence with communities across British Columbia, including Indigenous communities, and when they bring something forward, we'll respond to it and react to it. But there's, the government of Alberta itself has said it's not coming for a bit.
Okay, they're saying that, but I think you can appreciate the fact that pressure is right now on your government, on your Liberal government, to prove to Albertans that you're actually standing up for their priorities, amongst them pipelines.
Yeah, and I think Albertans have got a lot to be happy with the budget that was just passed. You know, there's good economic fundamentals there. The major project office is headquartered in Calgary. It's led by Don Farrell, who is a well-known Albertan. And in the first tranche, there was also a conversation about the Pathways project, which was put in there as Pathways Plus, and the plus is more takeaway capacity, as we call it in Alberta, for oil and gas products to markets. So, I think Alberta has been one of the real strong benefactors of the major project office so far.
Okay, you say that, but I'm just thinking back to last Sunday during the Grey Cup game. As you know, the Prime Minister was booed during the coin toss at the game. Sure, he got some cheers, but he was being booed, and the polls do have Liberals at a statistical tie with Conservatives right now. Are you worried that your priorities, or at least your interpretation of how Albertans and Western Canadians should be taking things, are not meeting the moment for many people in that part of the country?
Well, first of all, I mean, Alberta and Manitoba are psychologically and geographically very far apart. I would point to the comments.
But there were Saskatchewan fans in the crowd.
Oh, there's always Saskatchewan fans everywhere. You can't get rid of the guys. But, in Alberta, the Premier of Alberta talked about her approval of the second tranche of projects. She talked about her approval of the first tranche and how positive the working relationship is, and her hopes that there will be, more news to come in the next bit.
So you don't think Albertans are losing patience? Because I can point to a headline in the National Post this weekend saying exactly that.
Oh, no, I don't think so at all. I don't think that the statistics bear that out. I saw some polling the other day, I think it was from Ecos, that showed the Liberals as popular as they've ever been in Alberta.
Okay. Listen, I also want to talk about the Major Projects Office, because I think there's some question as to how that actually operates. Because if the Prime Minister is choosing the projects being fast-tracked, what's the Major Projects Office actually doing? Because at best, it could be expediting projects. At worst, it could be a rubber stamp or just another layer of bureaucracy. Can you walk us through that? Because I think some Canadians are still very confused as to what it is actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Major Projects Office has been given a couple of jobs to do by the Prime Minister. One of them is making sure, of course, that the projects are being considered for designation as a project of national interest, which would allow all of the approvals to happen kind of concurrently instead of in a waterfall fashion, one after the other, which means those approvals happen faster. There's a single document of permissions or regulatory requirements, and then everything can move just in a more expedited fashion, which is, a unique need of big projects, right? So that's one part of the job. The other part is helping them work through the other details and like financing, and that doesn't mean government money is going to them, but it means that, for example, the Major Project Office will help them explore their international financing opportunities, their national opportunities with private enterprises, whether there are loans available, whether there are existing grant programs from governments. Because one of the realities is to build big things in practical terms, what usually happens is government has to work with business, has to work with communities, has to work with Indigenous communities, and everybody's got to get together. And the Major Project Office is going to have that expertise to allow those things to happen more smoothly.
Okay, so who's choosing projects then? Is it the Prime Minister that's choosing projects and the office is facilitating those projects? Who's actually deciding which projects to go through?
So the proposals come from all over. At that point, they're reviewed by the Build Canada Committee of Cabinet. Recommendations are made to Dominic LeBlanc. Those recommendations go to the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And that's the short version. But the longer version is really it's less about choosing and it's more about facilitating. It's making sure that those projects have a way to go when they need to work through some of those regulatory hoops that would otherwise exist. Find some of that financing that might otherwise be more difficult to get to. And one of the things we've heard from companies is that just the very act of having a major project process is creating investor confidence. It's saying, okay, Canada is really interested in doing this. And that certainly came up at Natural Resources Committee pretty recently.
Mm-hmm. So how should Canadians judge your government's success or failure? By how many shovels are in the ground by the spring, by the jobs created? What's the measure Canadians should be using when they consider what your government's doing with these projects of national significance, as well as the Major Projects Office?
Yeah, the yardstick is in the legislation, right? It's about, does it grow Canada's economy? Does it support our environmental goals? Does it support Indigenous reconciliation? And those are the metrics, ultimately. We want to make sure that Canada is stronger, can stand on its own internationally. We want to diversify
How will you
markets.
report that back, though? Like, are you going to give a measure? Are you going to give a report card to say this was accomplished, this was accomplished?
Yeah.
How's that going to be communicated?
Yeah, look, I think Canadians will give us the ultimate report card, but we're seeing right now, for example, in these first two waves, $116 billion of investment would come from that. That's more than the GDP of all but 4 provinces. This is ultimately going to be about how we move the dial, whether we make people's lives better, whether we increase wages, whether we increase our ability to interact on the world stage and diversify our markets away from the United States. And that list will be there for everybody to see and everybody to judge.
I think one of the disconnects here, Corey, is the fact that there is the business way of doing things, establishing a benchmark, establishing a process by which things go through, which your government has done. The other is showing to Canadians that you have actually delivered. And I guess that's where I'm stuck on here. How are you going to show that deliverable? In terms of a physical form that Canadians can understand, how are you going to communicate that?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it is going to be shovels in the ground. It is going to be jobs. It is going to be economic growth. But along the way, there's going to be an awful lot of KPIs that we can turn to as well, including investment, including the fact that people are now being employed in secondary and tertiary industries. When you build a big mine, for example, it's not just people at the mine that are employed. There are bankers that are employed in downtown Toronto. There are engineers that are employed in downtown Calgary. And all of that stuff tends to happen, as these projects move along. So I mean, there's much to come. Canadians will judge, but I think the early results are just awesome.
I'm asking a question about communication because, if you take the budget, for example, passes a big hurdle last night, but according to a recent Leger poll, 30% of Canadians believe the budget will have no impact on them. 32% believe the budget will have a negative impact on them. Your minister has spent a lot of time speaking to industry leaders in Bay Street, but has your government done enough to communicate your budget and priorities like national projects to Canadians on Main Street? Because there seems to be a disconnect if the vast majority of Canadians either don't care or don't believe the budget's going to help them.
Well, that's not how I would characterize it. I think that the vast majority of Canadians think that we've got this right now, and they're going to judge based on the results as they come through. And look, I mean, polls go up, polls go down. Right now, they're looking pretty good for the government, and that's a nice thing.
But how are you going to communicate that?
I think Canadians are looking at it and they're feeling pretty well communicated to. But insofar as the work that a government always does, it is our job to go out and explain to people what this means. It's our job to go out and say, this budget is passed, this is what it means to your life. This major project was put forward, this is what it means to your life. And that work's going on. I mean, that's what every MP on the government side was doing over the last week during the constituency week. And it's really just about going out there and explaining to stakeholders, explaining to individuals exactly how that changes their life for the better.
So you're happy with the cell job that's happening, or do you think there needs to be improvement?
No, I'm really happy. I'm also a comms guy, so I'm always the biggest critic because I see those things and I look at them. But there's always more you can do. But I think it would be just nitpicking because I think all of the ministers have been out there doing good work. I think the MPs have been out there doing good work, and the proof is in the pudding.
Corey Hogan, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.